This is Mario Circuit 2, and it is one of the most broken tracks in any racing game. It doesn't have any massive shortcuts to skip the entire race, but what it does have more than makes up for that. You see, speedrunners will often try to perform crazy strategies to finish as fast as possible, and in most games, that either means abusing the game's code to skip an entire lap, or skipping just one corner of the track. But what would happen if there was a track where every single corner had a shortcut? Welcome to the TAS history of SNES Mario Circuit 2. At first glance, Mario Circuit 2 looks quite simple. Being almost completely flat, with walls on all sides, it looks like very little can be done on the track. However, the simple nature of the track is surprisingly deceptive. In fact, it only took 8 months after the game was released for the first shortcut to be found. You see, although most of the track appears simple, there was one part of the track which seemed like there might be an obvious shortcut, and it's something that most players have probably tried at some point. When you go off the glider ramp at the end of the lap, it seems like it should be possible to go directly to the left and head straight for the finish. But there was a problem. The idea was too obvious, and to prevent it, the developers made it so that the moment you go over the wall, the game will respawn you. But naturally, it didn't take very long for speedrunners to get around that. In July of 2012, a French player called Ridley discovered that even though you couldn't go over the wall, it was actually possible to land back onto the wall by going around it. From there, it would then be possible to stay on the wall and drive around part of the track, cutting off a large portion of the track without using any mushrooms. This strategy, known as pasta, could save up to 1.5 seconds per lap, and so this was the starting place for Mario Circuit 2 TASs. Despite the common misconception, a TAS, or tool-assisted speedrun, is actually created by a human player. In Mario Kart 7, a TAS is a speedrun that a player drives in slow motion, while also using a tool called save states. Save states create a save of the game at any point, which players can return to retry certain sections until they're optimized. Because of the size of 3DS games, it took a long time for these tools to be possible. So even though Mario Kart 7 was released in 2011, the first TAS of Mario Circuit 2 would not happen until March 4th, 2021, when a player called Luis completed a lap with a time of 20.537. Luis starts his run by tricking off the yellow glider pad, landing on the wall, and doing pasta. From there, Luis then did a trick known as U-turn. By starting a drift and driving so that only your front wheels are still on the track, or in this case the wall, it's actually possible to turn sharper than you normally would be able to, which allowed for the turn after pasta to also be cut off. Luis then drove the rest of the track as normal. He used mushrooms to cut off the turns after U-turn, drove inside of the pipe on the corner before the glider, and finished the run. Although many of the strategies used had been established years prior, this TAS did one thing differently to most of the runs. For over 8 years, ever since the first world record with pasta, mushroom tyres had been used on the track. Mushroom tyres allow for turns to be taken much tighter, which made it easier to perform both pasta and the U-turn. However, Luis thought that this might not be the fastest strategy, and decided to use red monster tyres. Compared to mushroom tyres, red monsters don't turn as tightly, but they also don't slow you down as much off-road. This change allowed Luis to save time on the corner before the glider, but it also meant that he lost time at the U-turn. But that run was just the beginning. On most tracks, after the first TAS was made, it would take months for improvements to happen. But Mario Circuit 2 was a bit different, and what happened over the next 24 hours was something that nobody could have expected. By the end of the day, the TAS had been lowered to a 20.107, more than 4/10 of a second faster than the first TAS. Because Luis determined that mushroom tyres were faster overall, mushroom tyres were used for all of these runs. But other than that, there were no major strategy changes compared to the original TAS, just better driving and slowly but surely improving each corner until it got closer and closer to perfection. It was becoming increasingly clear what the ultimate goal on the track would be, a 19-second lap. But could that actually be possible? Well, Luis certainly thought so, and the next day, Luis finished the TAS with a time of 20.041. The time was now less than half a tenth away from sub 20. But for a run this short, being half a tenth away from sub 20 is still a massive amount of time to find. The only way to make sure it was possible was to innovate just a tiny bit more. One of the most interesting things about Mario Kart 7 is how each part of the kart can be switched out for other parts. Each of these parts have their own unique characteristics, and this level of customization allows for each track to use slightly different combinations depending on which combination is most beneficial. Before now, almost every TAS of the track had been done using the swooper. But to try and make sure that sub 20 was possible, Luis decided to try using the Beast Glider. The Beast Glider, along with the Super Glider and the Gold Glider, have the fastest top speed out of any of the gliders. However, their decreased handling make it harder to land on the wall to do pasta. But if it was possible, the time that would be saved at the end of the lap thanks to the extra speed would be more than worth it. And so, armed with this new idea, Luis started working on the new TAS. And later that same day, Luis would finish one of the most historic TASes in the game's history. (19.972). By just 28 milliseconds, he had done it. In Luis's own words, this was the best he could do, and nobody thought otherwise. After all, the run looked incredible. What more even was there to do? This was it. The ultimate goal on the track had been reached, and that could only mean that it was the end of the story for Mario Circuit 2. In 2013, one of the most well-known glitch hunters, Ryanator, posted a video showing all the ramp shortcuts on the track, and one of the shortcuts in that video inspired many players to try it out for themselves. By jumping across the track after the U-turn, it was possible to stay on the wall all the way until the glider. Now, I should clarify that even though it was a video showing ramp shortcuts, nobody thought it could actually have a chance of being faster. The setup took an extremely long time, and it didn't really cut off that much of the track. For years, it was something that people tried for fun, being used in compilation videos and for challenges. It wasn't until 6 years later, in 2019, that a player called CF thought of a way that it might be made faster. CF's idea was to do the first jump the same as in the video, but instead of driving completely around the next corner, you would instead jump across the gap to the glider. If it was possible, it had the potential to save time, but it sounded a bit far-fetched, and nobody at the time even tried it. It would take 2 years until the shortcut idea was even attempted. While in a voice call with HGT and a few other people, I recalled seeing CF talk about the idea and decided to test it out. And just 2 hours later, I had managed to get a 20.734, just 0.8 of a second slower than the TAS. But the crazy thing was, the run was completely unoptimized. It lost a massive amount of time aligning for the hop across the track, and the jump to the glider also looked improvable. After seeing my attempt at the shortcut, HGT immediately started trying for himself, and later that same day, HGT made history when he completed this TAS. (18.393). HGT had figured out that by using a technique known as a double hop, it was possible to make it across the gap by slowing down much less. By hopping twice on a ledge while drifting, it's possible to get more height than normal, without slowing down. This saved a massive amount of time compared to the original idea, and was truly pivotal in proving the shortcut to be faster. After the shortcut had been discovered, it was important to come up with a name for it. Now, you might think that the process of naming a new strategy might seem pretty trivial, and you'd be completely right. But within the Mario Kart 7 community, pasta is one of the most iconic shortcuts there is, and it was important to us to continue that legacy. A few names were thrown around: CF Strat, Super Pasta, or as it was called in the original video by Ryanator, If Goku 7 tripped on the floor. But eventually, HGT made a suggestion that stuck: spaghetti. Quite literally being a long type of pasta, it made perfect sense, and was an important part in continuing the legacy that pasta had within the community. However, despite the discovery of spaghetti, the category would enter a period of inactivity. Spaghetti was by far the hardest strategy in the game, and this difficulty made it daunting for anybody looking to improve the TAS. Thankfully, this period of inactivity ended significantly earlier than might have been thought, thanks to an Austrian player called Thomas, who found this shortcut. Now, although this might seem extremely obvious at first glance, there's a good reason as to why this had never been done before. As I mentioned earlier, when you fly over the wall, the game will respawn you. It loses a massive amount of time, and it's the reason that more of the last turn isn't cut off. But there's one thing about these runs that I haven't mentioned yet, and some of you may have noticed it. At the end of the lap, instead of tricking off the yellow glider pad normally, every single run has actually cancelled the glider, then drove onto the yellow glider pad, tricked and finished the lap. Although it looks like it should be slower, there's something about the game that makes it actually faster: bounce physics. For some reason, bounce pads in Mario Kart 7 have a strange property, where the lower that your speed is, the faster and higher you will go when you trick off it. This means that on a lot of tracks, it's actually faster to slow down before tricking off objects that have these bounce physics. These physics also apply to the yellow bounce pad on Mario Circuit too, which is why runs slow down before going off it at the end of a run. But what Thomas had realised was that these physics could be exploited even more. You see, on most tracks, this is done purely to save time due to the extra speed gained from doing so. But Thomas abused the other half of what it does, and used the extra height that you gain from slowing down to fly high into the air and go over the barrier that respawns you. It turns out, the plane that respawns you when you go over the wall didn't actually extend upwards infinitely, and because of this, it is possible to fly over the wall, as long as you fly high enough to go over the barrier that respawns you. And just 3 days later, the first TAS using this new strategy was completed. On July 29th, 2021, I improved the old TAS by over a second, with a time of 17.127. In addition to the last corner cut, the driving was cleaner than the former TAS. And there was also a small improvement to the double hop, where I spent less time slowing down in preparation for it. Nearly 5 months had passed since Louise completed a task which was, at the time, considered to be the absolute limit for the track. And 2 major discoveries later, we once again found ourselves with a goal to aim for, a 16-second TAS. And if history is anything to go by, it wouldn't take long to reach this goal. After all, it only took 1 day to achieve the first 19-second time. How hard could it be to improve by just 1 more tenth of a second? But as time went on, it was seeming increasingly likely that a 16-second time wouldn't happen anytime soon. Months went by without any real signs that it would be improved, and although some places around the run looked improvable, nobody seemed willing to make the final push. As with all of the other TASs following the first 19-second lap, it took a new discovery to inspire someone to improve the TAS. And in November of 2021, one last discovery was found. One of the most important things for any Mario Kart 7 speedrunner to learn are straight stretch mini turbos, or SSMTs for short. Straight stretch mini turbos are done on straights to save a little bit of time, and also realign for the next corner. In most cases, SSMTs are only faster if performed with either slick, gold, red monster, or monster tyres, but there are specific situations where it's also faster with mushroom tyres. The main situation where this is the case is if a mushroom is used directly afterwards, but it turns out, by using the edge of a wall, it's actually possible to charge a mini turbo with a straighter angle. With some precise movements afterwards to drive straight again, a few hundredths of a second could be saved. Although it was only a minor time save, it was enough to inspire me to push for a 16-second lap. This time, of a 16.858 is where the TAS stands today. But that's only one part of the story, and the other part is perhaps even crazier than what we've looked at so far. Welcome to the history of the 3-lap TAS. We first need to go back to the beginning, when HGT made the first 3-lap TAS of Mario Circuit 2. The first 3-lap TASs didn't have any crazy glider strategies, didn't use spaghetti, and were overall quite simple. Drive lap 1 as normal, using 2 mushrooms to cut through the sand at the start of the lap, and collecting 10 coins along the way. Then, do pasta on laps 2 and 3, and finish the run. The TAS was improved 4 times using this general strategy, with the first TAS of a 107.716 being made on March 5th, 2021, and being slowly improved over the next couple of months, with no major changes to the strategy. By the time spaghetti was discovered, the TAS had been lowered to a 107.174, and had spaghetti not been discovered, it's very likely that the TAS would have gone down to a 106. But just like it changed the single lap category forever, the 3-lap category would quickly change, when on July 15th, 2021, I finished the TAS with a final time of 104.693, nearly 2.5 seconds faster than the former TAS. Most of the first lap in this TAS was the same as in all of the other TASs, with the only change being that only 1 mushroom was used to cut across the sand at the start of the lap. On laps 2 and 3, spaghetti was done, by driving back down the wall after doing U-turn and aligning for the jump. As this was the first 3-lap TAS using spaghetti, it was fairly unoptimized, and was more of a proof of concept than an actual TAS. While I was working on finishing the first 3-lap TAS using spaghetti, HGT had started work on the first 3-lap TAS using the double hop method to do spaghetti. When working on the first single lap TAS with spaghetti, HGT had come extremely close to landing on the wall with only 1 mushroom, and knew that it should be possible, and it was. By the time I had finished making the 104.6 TAS, HGT had started lap 3, with a run that was on pace to be a 103. But before he had finished that TAS, I was struck with a wave of inspiration. What if it was faster to do spaghetti on all 3 laps? At first, this might seem completely obvious. Of course it would be faster to do the fastest strategy on all 3 laps. But even after the idea was thought of, it still wasn't as clear as it might seem like it should be. You see, coins play a big role in the strategies used in Mario Kart 7. Each coin you collect increases your top speed by half a kilometer per hour, with it being possible to have a maximum of 10 coins at any time. I mentioned earlier that it was possible to collect 10 coins on lap 1 by driving normally. But by doing spaghetti on all 3 laps, you would only be able to collect 4 coins. So even though you're cutting off a lot of the track, for the rest of the run, you'll be driving 3 km per hour slower than if you hadn't done spaghetti. Because HGT was already working on a TAS using double hop, he decided to finish that, while I started to work on the first 3 out of 3 TAS. Because of the significant difference in speed, there was absolutely no way that doing a double hop would be possible, so the slower method would have to be used. And despite HGT starting his TAS first, I would finish first with a 104.127, achieved just 14 hours after the previous TAS. The new strategy for lap 1 involved collecting the first 3 coins as normal. However, instead of using a mushroom to get to the ramp afterwards, it instead involved releasing a super mini turbo and hopping into the off-road. The gap from the road to the ramp was just about small enough that the boost from the super mini turbo would still be active, allowing for top speed to be maintained. This then made it possible to jump onto the wall using the ramp, and from there, do spaghetti on lap 1, and drive the next 2 laps the same as in the previous TAS, but with 6 less coins for the rest of the run. But with HGT predicting that his TAS would be a 103, the first 3 out of 3 TAS was, in all honesty, a little underwhelming. Despite doing spaghetti on all 3 laps, it was still slower than what was predicted for a 2 out of 3 TAS. And this prediction turned out to be true, when the next day, HGT finished his TAS with a time of 103.889. So here we are, 2 TASes later, and based purely on the final time of each run, it was still unclear on which strategy was faster. The double hop that HGT was able to do on laps 2 and 3 saved so much time that even with the time save of doing spaghetti on the first lap, the 2 out of 3 TAS still finished with a faster time than the 3 out of 3 TAS. But despite the final times being somewhat similar, it was actually pretty clear which strategy was fastest. And even though the final times of the first TASes might suggest otherwise, it was actually the 3 out of 3. So why is this? Well, even though it was just over 200 milliseconds slower, the 3 out of 3 TAS also looked much less optimized. Spaghetti was a new strategy, and although the 2 out of 3 TAS had a faster final time, it was nearly impossible for any significant amounts of time to be gained on lap 1. Laps 2 and 3 also looked a lot more optimized visually, and because of this, the general consensus was that a 3 out of 3 TAS would have much more potential than anything that was possible by only doing spaghetti on 2 laps. And this would be proven true the next day, when I improved the TAS by over a second, with a final time of 102.689. Despite the massive time cut, this TAS was nothing more than an optimized version of the first 3 out of 3. Every part of the run was cleaner, with a faster landing onto the wall, a faster approach to the jump across the track, and just overall much better driving. After this TAS was made, there was a lot of buzz around the potential for a sub 1 minute time to happen, with lots of people wondering if it was possible. You see, everyone knew that the TAS wasn't being done with a double hop, so even though it was more than 2.5 seconds away, many players expected the double hop to be implemented and for the time to be lowered much more. But when I said earlier that a double hop would be impossible with only 4 coins, it wasn't an exaggeration. After countless hours of trying, nothing had really come close, and it made it demotivating for anybody looking to improve the TAS. In December of 2021, I improved the TAS to a 101.723, thanks to a new time save that HGT discovered by abusing the bounce physics. But after that, no work was done on the track. Most players were either working on other tracks or not making TASs at all. Time kept going by, and still nobody seemed interested in improving the TAS. But finally, in October of 2022, interest in the category was finally renewed. It had been nearly a full year since the last TAS was made, and during that time, major improvements to TASing as a whole had been made. In May, BSQO developed a code which allowed for the inputs from a ghost to be copied over to the player, until whatever point the player decided to take over from. This code allowed for TASs to be much more optimized, and also made it possible for multiple people to collaborate on runs. The other major thing that started being used for TASs was motion controls. The default way to steer in Mario Kart 7 is using the circle pad. Because the circle pad is only a single input device, it's impossible to steer completely left or right while also steering completely up or down. This is most noticeable in gliders, where many shortcuts require holding down while in a glider to gain more height. But it turns out, by using motion controls to steer left and right, and then also using the circle pad to steer up and down, it was possible to steer completely to the left or completely to the right while also holding completely down. Thanks to motion controls, several new strategies were found throughout 2022, and in October it was Mario Circuit 2's turn. On October 4th, HGT sent me a video showing him using motion controls to skip the last corner on Mario Circuit 2. Although it cut off slightly less of the corner than when a mushroom is used, this discovery meant that more than half a second could be saved on lap 3 compared to the previous TAS. And that discovery was enough to motivate me to go all in on trying to perform the double hop with 4 coins. But it turns out that going all in wasn't actually necessary. Because of how different the approach to spaghetti is on lap 1, the double hop ended up being quite easy to perform. After performing the double hop, I spent the next couple of days optimizing spaghetti and then sent the run to HGT to see if he could optimize it any more. And although he wasn't able to improve on what I had already done, what he did next was even better. This crazy strategy by HGT meant that it was now time for me to be faced with the double hop on lap 2. And after thousands of attempts, I finally did it. This double hop was the highest one that I had ever had, and it meant that we would be able to finish the run. After HGT did the glider shortcut again at the end of lap 2, and I did the double hop again on lap 3, all that was left to do was one final shortcut, and we would see what the final time would be when we crossed the finish line. This time of a 59.858 is where the TAS stands today, and it shows just how far Mario Kart players are willing to go to achieve their goals. From skipping just one corner to skipping every single corner on the track, Mario Circuit 2 is truly a perfect example that if you put your mind to it, anything truly is possible. Thanks for watching. If you want to learn more about this TAS, I've started a Patreon where I posted an in-depth breakdown of the TAS, and will be posting more breakdowns in the future, as well as other bonus content. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, or if you just want to support the channel, there's a link in the description. Thanks, and I hope you enjoyed.